This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. So I want you to picture this really classic doomsday scenario in nature.
Okay, setting the stage.
Yeah, you have an animal population, right?
Right.
And it drops all the way down to the single digits.
Right, a total crash.
Exactly. And biologists have this term for what happens next, which is just terrifying. They call it the extinction vortex.
It is a great term, though. It's perfectly descriptive.
Right, because it's like this biological drain. You have this tiny population, they start inbreeding, all these hidden genetic diseases pile up, fewer babies survive.
And they just sort of agonizingly circle the drain until they vanish entirely.
Right. And usually once you cross the event horizon of that vortex, there is just no coming back. You are done.
That is the conventional wisdom, yeah.
But our mission for this deep dive today is to unpack this massive, totally fascinating study from the journal Science that proves, well, it proves that sometimes that vortex is actually a crucible.
It completely flips everything we thought we knew about conservation genetics.
It really does, because we're looking at one of the most iconic animals on the planet, the Australian koala.
Which is such a great subject for this.
Yeah, and we have this incredible data set to look at. We're talking 418 whole genome sequences, and we are going to explore how one specific group of these koalas stared down that extinction vortex, fell all the way in, and then somehow popped out the other side with, like, a genetic superpower.
And what's wild is that the mechanism behind it all was triggered by this completely clumsy, almost accidental human intervention in the 19th century.
Literally an accident.
Completely. And it forces us to question what genetic health actually means.
Yeah.
Because as the data in this paper shows, having a technically low amount of genetic diversity is not always the absolute death sentence we assume it is.
Right. So to really grasp the sheer scale of this paradox, we have to rewind. We need to go back in time to Australia in the late 1800s.
A very bad time to be a koala.
A terrible time. So the koala used to range incredibly widely across the eastern and southern parts of the continent. But by the late 19th century, they were just facing an absolute onslaught.
Yeah, you had European colonizers clear-cutting massive swathes of eucalyptus forests for agriculture.
Habitat loss on a massive scale.
Exactly. And diseases were tearing through whatever fragmented populations were left. But the really immediate devastating threat
Was the fur trade.
It was an industrial-level slaughter. Millions of koala pelts were just being shipped out of Australia to markets in London, the U.S., Canada.
Because the fur was thick and waterproof.
Yeah, highly sought after. And in the southern state of Victoria, the situation wasn't just bad, it was basically apocalyptic.
They were practically hunted to local extinction. I mean, by the 1890s, you simply could not find them in the wild in Victoria anymore.
They were just gone.
So, faced with the total annihilation of the Victorian koala, people panic, and they launch this desperate, really rudimentary conservation effort.
The historical records from this time are wild to read.
They really are. They managed to scrape together a tiny handful of surviving Victorian koalas, and we are talking about fewer than 10 individuals.
Less than 10.
Yeah. And they essentially just marooned them on a couple of offshore islands, primarily this place called French Island down in western Port Bay.
They put them on a literal life raft. And, I mean, the goal wasn't some grand genetic preservation strategy. They weren't thinking about DNA.
Right. They just wanted to hide them from the guns.
Exactly. They dumped these few koalas on French Island and just left them there. And honestly, this is where the biological textbook says the story should end.
It should be over.
But you fast forward to the 1920s, and the entire Victorian koala population, all of whom were descended from those original island refugees, is estimated to be somewhere between 500 and 1,000 individuals.
Okay, wait. Let's just pause on that math for a second, because this is where the paradox really begins for you listening. If you only have a founder population of less than 10 koalas,
Right.
everybody born after that is basically mating with their sibling or their parent or their first cousin for generations.
It's extreme inbreeding.
It's like trying to build a robust, thriving metropolis using only the DNA from one really small family reunion. Biologically, how did they not just biologically implode right there on the island?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? To understand why this is such a shock, we have to look at the mechanics of a severe population bottleneck.
Okay, break that down for us.
So, in a large, healthy population, natural selection is the driver. The fittest genes survive, they get passed on. But when a population crashes down to single digits, those normal rules of selection, they get suspended.
So what takes over?
A phenomenon called random genetic drift takes over completely.
Wait, so it stops being about survival of the fittest and just becomes this chaotic roll of the dice?
Exactly that. It doesn't matter if a specific gene is incredibly beneficial for fighting off disease. If the one or two koalas carrying that gene happen to fall out of a tree and die,
Oh,
yeah, that gene is just gone from the species forever. And conversely, bad mutations can become permanently fixed in the entire population, simply by bad luck.
but the bigger issue is the inbreeding itself, right? Like, what is actually happening at a cellular level when siblings mate for generations?
It comes down to recessive, deleterious alleles.
Okay, let's unpack that jargon.
Right, so that's the scientific term for bad, harmful mutations that usually stay hidden. Because every living thing carries genetic errors,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
But we have two copies of every gene, one from the mother, one from the father. Usually, a healthy dominant gene will just mask the bad recessive one.
But when two parents are closely related,
They share the exact same rare genetic errors. So when they mate, there's a very high chance their offspring will inherit two copies of that bad gene.
and without a healthy copy to mask it, the defect expresses itself.
Exactly.
I think a good way to visualize this for you listening is to imagine the genome as a dual-engine airplane.
Oh, I like that.
Right. So if one engine, say, the gene from the mother fails because of a manufacturing defect, the other engine from the father keeps you flying, you don't even notice the broken engine.
Right, you're still in the air.
But if you are highly inbred, the engines are identical. So if there is a catastrophic manufacturing defect in one, it is guaranteed to be in the other. Both engines fail, and the plane crashes.
That is a brilliant way to picture it. And that plane crash, in biological terms, is inbreeding depression. It manifests as plunging fertility rates, compromised immune systems, massive infant mortality.
They just lose their adaptive potential entirely.
Yeah, they can't respond to environmental changes. They are trapped in the vortex.
So, according to all conventional wisdom, those Victorian koalas on French Island should have been an evolutionary dead end. They should have slowly succumbed to the catastrophic failure of their own dual engines.
They really should have.
But history, and the data in the science paper, reveals that history had a very different plan. We're going to take a really quick break, but when we come back, we're going to look at the modern genomic map that completely shocked the scientific community. So before the break, we left a handful of highly inbred koalas stranded on French Island.
The ultimate bottleneck.
Right, and this brings us to the present day and the modern genomic map. Because the researchers involved in this study didn't just guess at what happened, they looked at the actual architectural blueprints of the species.
Right. They sequenced the whole genomes of 418 koalas.
Across 27 different populations, right?
Yeah, 3 states. You've got Queensland in the north, New South Wales in the middle, and Victoria down in the south.
And just to be clear about the scale of this for you listening, whole genome sequencing isn't just taking a cheek swab and looking at a few markers.
Oh, not at all.
This is reading the entire library of an individual's DNA, all 3+ billion base pairs. It allows you to look deep, deep into the evolutionary past.
It does. They used incredibly complex tools like coalescent models to estimate something called historical effective population sizes. We call it NE.
NE. Okay, now effective population size is not the census size, right?
Correct. It doesn't measure the raw number of animals you can physically count in the trees. It measures the number of individuals who are actually contributing genetically to the next generation.
Okay, so if you have a forest with 10,000 koalas, but 9,900 of them are sterile or never mate, your effective population size is only 100.
Yes, exactly. It's a measure of the actual genetic health and diversity of the breeding pool.
Okay, got it.
And going into this massive sequencing project, the scientific expectation was crystal clear. The northern populations, Queensland and New South Wales, they never faced an extreme 10-koala bottleneck like Victoria did.
Right. They maintained much larger, more continuous populations over the last century.
Therefore, the assumption was that the north would be the robust, healthy genetic strongholds of the species.
And Victoria, on the other hand, should be a genetic wasteland, totally ruined by that island bottleneck.
That was the assumption, yeah.
So the geneticists crack open the DNA from these 3 states, expecting to see the northern koalas thriving and the southern koalas barely hanging on by a thread, but instead they find a total paradox.
The genomes completely flipped the script. They found a reality that contradicts the basic assumptions of conservation.
So what did they see? Let's look at the Victorian koalas first.
Well, the genomic data confirmed that, yes, the bottleneck absolutely happened. They have extremely low overall genetic diversity.
Okay.
The researchers quantified this by measuring something called runs of homozygosity, or ROH.
Okay, let's unpack ROH. We know homozygosity means inheriting the exact same version of a gene from both parents. What does a run of it look like in the DNA?
Think back to your dual-engine plane analogy. A run of homozygosity is when it's not just one engine that's identical, but massive sections of the entire aircraft.
Hmm.
You're looking at a genome, and suddenly you see these huge stretches of DNA, thousands, sometimes millions of base pairs in a row, that are completely 100% identical between the mother's chromosome and the father's chromosome.
Wow. So it is the undeniable structural fingerprint of severe inbreeding.
Yes.
It means your parents were so closely related that they passed down massive, unbroken, identical chunks of their DNA.
And the Victorian koalas have the highest cumulative ROH by a massive margin. On average, 68.1% of their entire genome is tied up in these identical runs.
Almost 70%.
Yeah. Compare that to about 41% in New South Wales and 36% in Queensland.
Yeah.
So the inbreeding is undeniably there. The legacy of those 10 koalas on French Island is written in bold across their entire genetic code.
And this is the giant, shocking but of this entire deep dive. The northern koalas, the supposed genetic strongholds with all the diversity, are the ones actually in massive trouble.
This is where that effective population size metric, the NE, becomes so critical. The researchers use a technique called linkage disequilibrium to track the recent demographic history of these populations.
Over the last 100 generations or so, right?
Yeah.
Hold on. Linkage disequilibrium sounds terrifying. How does that let you look back in time?
Think of it like tracking passengers on a train over generations.
Okay.
When genes sit close to each other on a chromosome, they tend to get passed down together. They are riding in the same train car. But over generations, as DNA recombines, those passengers get shuffled around to different cars.
Right.
By measuring how often certain genes are still sitting next to each other today, that's the disequilibrium, we can calculate exactly how much shuffling has happened.
Oh, that's clever.
And from that shuffling, we can mathematically trace backwards to see how large or small the population was at specific points in history.
That is incredible. So they use this train passenger math to look at the northern koalas, and what do they see?
They see a free fall. The effective population size in Queensland and New South Wales has been sharply declining over the last 10 to 30 generations.
A free fall.
Yeah, for example, the Queensland population dropped from an NEC of over 1,100 down to just 141 in the span of 33 generations.
While the Victorian koalas, despite being 68% hopelessly inbred, showed a rapid recovery in effective population size over the past 40 generations.
Yeah.
How is that biologically possible? I mean, how can the highly diverse northern koalas be collapsing from the inside while the highly inbred Victorian koalas are recovering?
Well, it forces us to ask what diversity actually means. Genetic diversity isn't always just a collection of good, useful traits. It includes everything, the good, the neutral, and the very, very bad.
Okay.
Because the northern koalas maintained larger populations for a longer period of time, they accumulated a wide variety of mutations. And many of those are functional mutations that are actively harmful. They are carrying what geneticists call a high mutational load.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to synthesize this for the listener. Think of the northern koala populations like a massive, historic, multinational corporation. On paper, they look incredibly wealthy. They have huge assets, hundreds of different departments, thousands of employees. That is their high genetic diversity.
Right.
But secretly, embedded deep inside all those departments, they are carrying a mountain of toxic debt. Bad loans, failing products, lawsuits. That is their mutational load.
Yes.
And as environmental pressures mount, like climate change, disease, habitat loss, that toxic debt is starting to drag the entire corporation down, which is why their effective population size is shrinking today.
That is an incredibly apt way to visualize it, because larger populations can tolerate carrying that toxic debt for a while. The good genes mask the bad ones, just like profitable departments mask the failing ones. But the debt is still there, accumulating.
Meanwhile, the Victorian koalas are like a scrappy entrepreneur who went completely devastatingly bankrupt in the 1890s. They lost absolutely everything in the bottleneck.
It is a total crash.
They had to sell off all their assets, fire all their staff. But as a result of that brutal bankruptcy process, all of their toxic debt was completely wiped clean.
Exactly.
So today, they are poor in overall diversity. They don't have a lot of assets, but they are totally 100% debt-free. Their genome is stripped down to the absolute bare metal, but the engine runs flawlessly.
And the paper actually proves your analogy mathematically. They use a specific metric to contrast functional, potentially harmful mutations against neutral, non-functional ones.
And what did it show?
It confirmed that the Victorian populations carry a significantly reduced mutational load compared to the North. The bottleneck acted as a brutal debt-clearing mechanism. Biologists call this purging.
But I want to linger on that word purging because it sounds so, I don't know, clinical, like running a cleanup program on your computer.
Right.
But biologically, what did that actually look like on French Island in the 1900s? How does a bottleneck purge bad genes?
It is not clinical at all. It is a ruthless, often gruesome process of natural selection. When you isolate those few koalas and force them to inbreed, those hidden recessive diseases we talked about, the failing dual engines, suddenly start expressing themselves in the offspring.
Oh, wow.
What that means in reality is that many, many koala joeys likely died horrible deaths. They were born with compromised immune systems, physical deformities, or metabolic failures.
So they just didn't survive to pass those genes on.
Exactly. The purging wasn't a magical wash. It was a ruthless culling. Every time a sickly koala died before it could reproduce, it took those bad mutations to the grave with it.
That's intense.
Over a few generations, the only koalas left standing on that island were the ones who, by sheer genetic lottery, happened not to carry those fatal genetic debts.
Wow.
The inbreeding forced the bad genes out into the open, and the harsh reality of survival buried them in the dirt.
That is dark, but it's incredibly elegant. They went through a genetic crucible. But, being debt-free isn't enough to build an empire. You still need a way to generate new wealth, new diversity, right? A stripped-down engine might run well, but it can't adapt to new fuels. How did the Victorian koalas get their evolutionary groove back?
That brings us to the engine of recovery, which might be the most fascinating ecological story in the whole paper.
Yeah. So throughout the 20th century, human wildlife managers realized that the Victorian islands were getting way too crowded. The koalas had survived the bottleneck, purged their debt, and were now breeding too well.
They were running out of trees.
Right. So managers started scooping them up, putting them on boats, and moving them back to the mainland of Victoria to repopulate the forests they had been hunted out of.
And what happened next was an explosion. We went from about 1,000 koalas in the 1920s to nearly 500,000 by the year 2020.
The demographic expansion was just staggering, and the sources highlight a very specific, almost unbelievable case study to illustrate this: the Cape Otway population.
Oh, this is wild.
This detail totally broke my brain when I read it. What happened at Cape Otway?
Okay, so in 1981, wildlife managers introduced just 75 koalas to the eucalyptus forests of Cape Otway on the southern coast of Victoria.
75 koalas. That is a tiny founder group.
Very tiny. But remember, these were purged, debt-free koalas. By 2013, that population of 75 had exploded to over 10,000 individuals.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me they went from 75 to 10,000 koalas in barely 30 years? That's what, maybe 4 or 5 koala generations?
Give or take, yeah.
Biologically, how is that even possible without them exhausting their food supply and crashing?
No, the truth is, they did exhaust their food supply.
Whoa.
It was a massive ecological boom and bust. They became severely overabundant. The koalas literally ate themselves out of house and home.
You're kidding.
No, they stripped the manna gum eucalyptus trees completely bare, killing the forests. It became an animal welfare crisis. Thousands of koalas began starving to death because they had bred so successfully they destroyed their own habitat.
So human managers had to step in again, right?
Yes, it required drastic interventions. Mass culling of starving animals, relocating thousands more, and eventually wildlife officers had to go into the canopy and administer hormone implants to female koalas to artificially sterilize them.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they had to put the population on birth control to stop the sheer momentum of their breeding.
That is insane. They went from being marooned on an island to avoid extinction to needing hormonal implants because they were too successful at surviving.
It's wild.
But let's look at the genetics of that explosion. How does a massive, messy population boom actually cure the genetic poverty of a bottleneck?
It comes down to the raw mathematics of sex and recombination.
Okay, break that down for us.
When a population expands exponentially, from 75 to 10,000, you have a massive amount of breeding happening, thousands upon thousands of mating events. And every single time 2 koalas mate, their DNA doesn't just pass down as a carbon copy.
Right.
During the formation of sperm and egg cells, the chromosomes line up, cross over, and swap pieces. They reshuffle the genetic deck. This is called recombination.
So because they are breeding at this frantic exponential pace, they are shuffling the deck constantly, millions of times over.
Precisely. And this hyperactive reshuffling does 2 vital things. First, it brings up bad combinations of genes.
How so?
Even in a purged genome, if you have two slightly annoying traits that cause a problem when they sit next to each other on the chromosome, recombination acts like a pair of scissors. It splits them apart and pairs them with better neighbors.
Oh, that makes sense.
And second, and much more importantly, it creates a massive canvas for new mutations.
Because every time a new baby is born, there is a tiny microscopic chance of a brand new random mutation appearing in the DNA.
Right. Now, in a small, stagnant population, a new mutation usually just vanishes. It gets lost to the chaos of genetic drift before it can be passed on.
But in a massively expanding population,
That new mutation suddenly has thousands of opportunities to take hold, survive, and spread through the generations. The sheer volume of new bodies being created means the species is actively generating its own new genetic diversity from scratch.
wow. And the study actually zeroes in on this phenomenon with something called minor allele frequency, or MAF analysis. I want to dig into this because it's where the proof of the recovery really lives. First, what exactly is an allele in this context?
An allele is simply a variant form of a given gene. So if the gene is for eye color, the alleles are the specific instructions for blue, brown, or green.
Okay.
In this genomic study, the researchers looked at all the genetic variants across the koala genomes and binned them into three categories based on how common they were across the population: common alleles, low-frequency alleles, and rare alleles.
So they categorized every genetic quirk into those three buckets, and what the researchers found was that, entirely as expected, the Victorian koalas really lack the common and low-frequency genetic variants.
Right, because the bottleneck.
Yeah, those buckets are mostly empty because those variants were wiped out during the bankruptcy of the bottleneck. But when they looked at the rare alleles bucket, the brand new, barely the mutations that are just starting to pop up in the population, the Victorian koalas are rapidly regenerating them.
It's the ratio that is so striking. The ratio of rare to low-frequency variants in the Victorian koalas is heavily, heavily skewed toward the rare.
Which means what?
This is the mathematical signature of an expanding population. It proves that their genetic recovery isn't just an illusion. It is being driven entirely by new mutations being generated right now in real time during this population boom. They are actively rebuilding their evolutionary potential.
Which connects to a concept that explains why this explosion worked so perfectly. It's called the genetic paradox of invasive species. We're going to take one more quick break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about how these cute little koalas basically pulled off an invasive species mover to save themselves. All right, we're back. So before the break, we were just about to touch on the genetic paradox of invasive species.
It is a brilliant parallel. If we look at the broader picture of global ecology, this is a very well-documented yet still baffling phenomenon.
Think about some of the most notorious invasive species on the planet, right? Like the cane toads in Australia or European starlings in North America. How do those invasions usually start?
Usually it's just a tiny handful of animals. A few toads brought over in a suitcase or a dozen birds released in a park.
Exactly. It's a tiny founder group, a massive genetic bottleneck. According to the classical textbooks, those animals should suffer from immediate inbreeding depression, fail to adapt, and die out.
But instead, they thrive. They conquer entire continents.
Why? Because they arrive in a new environment with absolutely no natural predators and unlimited food resources, so they breed. They expand exponentially.
And that rapid demographic expansion generates so much recombination and so many new rare alleles that they basically outrun their own genetic debt.
They achieve what we might call genetic escape velocity. The sheer force of their population explosion blasts them right out of the extinction vortex before the vortex can pull them under.
And what this science paper is suggesting is that the Victorian koalas pulled off an invasive species maneuver, but they did it in their own native habitat.
That is exactly what happened. The human wildlife managers provided the unlimited resources by constantly moving them to fresh, unpopulated eucalyptus forests on the mainland and protecting them from any hunting.
Without realizing it, humans simulated the exact ecological conditions an invasive species uses to achieve genetic escape velocity.
It is staggering to think about. The idea that massive, chaotic population explosions and the frantic reshuffling of DNA can actually overwrite the damage of a near-extinction event.
It's a total paradigm shift.
But the reason this study is published in Science, the reason it is causing such a stir right now, is because this isn't just an interesting history lesson. It is directly tied to a massive crisis happening today.
The current situation for the koala is incredibly dire. The northern koalas, ones up in Queensland, New South Wales, and the Australian Capital Territory, the ones with the high diversity and the heavy mutational load, they were officially listed as endangered under federal law just a few years ago.
They are facing a barrage of modern threats. We're talking about extreme habitat fragmentation from urban sprawl, the devastating Black Summer bushfires that wiped out massive chunks of the population.
And the rampant spread of diseases like chlamydia.
Right, which causes blindness and severe infertility in koalas. And now, on top of all the visible threats, this study proves they are facing a silent, accelerating genetic decline from within.
Their effective population size is dropping. Their toxic genetic debt is finally catching up with them, dragging them down just as the environmental pressures are peaking.
So the critical question becomes, how does the bizarre success story of the Victorian koalas help the struggling northern koalas?
And to answer that, we have to look at how conservationists have historically treated the Victorian koalas, because it hasn't been with respect, right?
Yeah, not at all.
It requires a fundamental, painful change in perspective for the scientific community. For a very long time, Victorian koalas were viewed by many conservationists as, frankly, damaged goods.
Really?
Yeah, because they had such low overall genetic diversity and those massive markers of inbreeding, the runs of homozygosity, they were officially considered genetically depauperate.
Depauperate. Wow. They were looked at like they were defective.
Yes, the prevailing assumption was that you would never ever want to use Victorian koalas to help save the northern koalas. The fear was that if you moved southern koalas up north, you would just be polluting the healthy northern gene pool with highly inbred bottleneck DNA.
Would be spreading the damage.
Exactly.
But the data in this new study proves that logic is completely 180 degrees backwards.
Entirely backwards.
Yeah.
The Victorian koalas aren't damaged goods. They are stripped down, highly functional survival machines.
Their genomes have been brutally purged of heavy mutational loads. They've proven they can breed so successfully they require birth control.
And they are actively generating new, functional genetic variation. They're exactly what the North needs.
The paper actually points to a real-world example of what happens when you mix these two different groups together. There is a specific koala population in New South Wales called Narrandera.
Right. The Narrandera population is the perfect accidental case study for the future of koala conservation. The historical records show that this specific population was derived from two divergent parental populations.
So what did they do?
Essentially, wildlife managers in the past introduced a mix of different koala lineages to the area, inadvertently crossing southern genetics with northern genetics.
And when the researchers looked at the genomes of the Narrandera koalas today, what did the blueprints reveal?
They found totally unique diversity patterns that disrupt the decline we see elsewhere. Specifically, the data shows that the Narrandera population is highly diverse when it comes to common alleles, meaning they have a rich baseline of genetic tools. But crucially, it has the lowest number of heterozygotes in the low and rare frequency allele bins among all the studied New South Wales and Queensland populations.
Which means what, exactly, for their survival?
It means that mixing different groups creates entirely new genomic architectures. By bringing in purged DNA, you're essentially introducing a stabilizing force.
Like paying off a chunk of that toxic debt.
Yes. It breaks up the toxic combinations in the northern DNA through recombination, while preserving the valuable, rare adaptations the northern koalas still possess, like their ability to tolerate much hotter climates or specific northern diseases.
So the ultimate recommendation of this paper, the big takeaway for anyone involved in saving endangered species, is that we need to entirely rewrite the conservation rulebook.
The authors argue passionately that low genetic diversity does not inherently mean a species is at an evolutionary dead end. We need to stop looking at diversity as a simple high score to be achieved.
Right. More diversity is not automatically better if that diversity is full of toxic mutations. We have to start looking at the type of diversity, the mutational load, and the demographic trajectory of the population.
The new strategy being proposed is active genetic mixing. We should strongly consider moving some of the thriving, debt-free Victorian koalas up north and intentionally breeding them with the struggling, burdened northern koalas.
By doing so, we could introduce heavily purged, highly functional genomes into the northern populations. The subsequent breeding and recombination could break up their toxic mutational loads, essentially offering them a genetic lifeline.
It's about engineering resilience through connectivity, rather than just building fences around struggling populations and watching them slowly decline.
It is just an incredible journey to wrap your head around for this deep dive. Think about it. A clumsy, desperate attempt in the 1890s to save a few koalas from hunters by throwing them onto a rock in the ocean. It accidentally created the exact perfect conditions for a genetic reboot.
It really is amazing.
By forcing the koalas through a brutal, painful bottleneck that purged their bad genes into the dirt, and then giving them the space and resources to rapidly expand and breed across the mainland, humans accidentally triggered a biological cleansing process.
It is a profound testament to the sheer resilience of biology, provided it is given the demographic space to operate. It shows that life finds a way to restructure itself, even from the brink of annihilation.
Which leaves me with a broader thought I really want you, the listener, to mull over as we end this deep dive. We've seen that rapid, chaotic population expansion can essentially cure the genetic baggage of a near-extinction event for the koala. But what does this mean for other critically endangered animals right now?
That is the new frontier of conservation genetics.
Could we deliberately harness this invasive species paradox to save other creatures trapped in an extinction vortex? Are we being way too cautious as conservationists by just trying to maintain small, stable, carefully managed sanctuary populations?
That's a great question.
Maybe what some of these species really need isn't a neat, tidy, protected zoo environment. Maybe what they actually need is the crucible of a bottleneck, followed by the space and the spark for a massive, messy, chaotic population explosion. Something to think about.
Heliox is produced by Michelle Brucker and Scott Bleakley. It features reviews of emerging research and ideas from leading thinkers, curated under their creative direction with AI assistance for voice, imagery, and composition. Systemic voices and illustrative images of people are representative tools, not depictions of specific individuals. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other episodes, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.